Hey guys, and welcome to the first Heroes of Newerth guide to hit my channel. These guides are mainly going to be aimed at puggers and not pro gamers, as when I'm playing I'm usually pugging, with maybe one or two friends. Let's get into the first character of Amun-Ra. Amun-Ra is a strength DPS semi-carry that can dish out a lot of burst damage in the early game. He can snowball relatively well if the early game goes in his favor, and if it goes really well, he'll remain a threat throughout the rest of the game. Amun-Ra can be played in a variety of ways, and can fill that void of whatever lane or jungle you are missing. Because of Ra's abilities, he is fit to solo mid, jungle, or lane with a partner. I usually play him as a laner because he can snowball a lot better with hero kills, which might not happen as fast if you sit in the jungle for 10 minutes or more, or go to mid. Of course, that is all dictated by your playstyle and opponents, and if you gank with him actively. So if you're new to the game, I recommend just laning with a support, which is what I usually do. Ra's abilities are what make this character so powerful. He can easily harass without having to worry about mana, he has a stun, and he has a slow. So let's get better acquainted with Ra's abilities before we talk about how you should use them in the lane. Ra's first ability is Path of Destruction. When this is cast on the targeted area, you send a meteor-like projectile 600 units ahead of your character. When the projectile lands, it stuns the opponents in the area and deals 320 damage at max level. It costs 20% of your health pool to use, but if you are under a blast when it hits, you are granted most of that back. It also increases your move speed to close the gaps between foes, and gives you a phase-like effect. This effect can also be used to get out of tough situations by going over ledges and other obstacles. Remember, you can also use the ability to cut down lots of trees at once. Ra's second ability is Ignite. When you trigger Ignite, you have 1.5 seconds before an AoE explosion erupts from Ra, damaging nearby enemies up to 200 plus 6% of max health, and also inflicting a slow on the enemies who are hit. The third ability is Ashes to Ashes, a passive ability that helps you maintain your presence in lane by giving you slight regenerative abilities. It also makes it so that when you take damage, your character's attack speed is increased, and you do a small AoE damage in a 350 AoE of your character. And that persists as long as you keep taking damage. Ra's fourth and final ability is Pyroclastic Rebirth, a self-resurrection spell that has a very long cooldown and requires half your mana to use. Since this ability is used automatically when you die, making sure you die before someone drains all of your mana is crucial to teamfights and for survival. When you rebirth, you automatically set off an Ignite and do up to 30% bonus damage for 10 seconds. This ability is just one of the reasons Ra is such a dominating force in the lanes. People don't tend to aim for the guy who has a self-resurrection ability. They'd go for the squishy guys first. As you can see, all of Ra's abilities synergize extremely well, and if you want to use them effectively, you'll have to maximize your efficiency with Path of Destruction. One of Ra's easiest combos to use is Path of Destruction. Run up to an opponent who is just stunned while also triggering your Ignite. Doing this will stun the enemy, dealing good damage, followed up by another burst of damage with a slow. At this point, Amun-Ra is also doing AoE from taking damage inflicted on himself, and has more attack speed. So you essentially just keep attacking your opponent. Unless it's late game, or the character has a lot of support, you will most likely have to retreat from the lane. Doing this on opponents frequently is easy enough because you don't have to worry about managing your mana pool, only your cooldowns and health. And because of your passive, you could just hold back for a minute and regen all of your health. Things can change a bit when you're facing a melee opponent though. If you're in a lane with another melee, you could potentially just open with Ignite while walking towards the melee character, dealing burst damage on him and the surrounding creeps, and slowing your opponent. Depending on the reaction of your opponent, you could follow up with Path of Destruction, which will be easier to land if the opponent is slowed. The way you level up your abilities will also factor into how well you perform in the early game. Ideally, you should pick up your third ability first, unless of course you have a plan for First Blood, followed by Path of Destruction, Ignite, and then depending on how the game goes, it will vary only slightly. If you're forced into a more defensive stance, take levels into your passive. If you're going to be going all out, take more levels in Ignite. Taking levels in Ignite after you've leveled 1 in each ability is a good objective because the stun doesn't scale from Path of Destruction, and the stun is what allows you to close in on your enemies, or support your laning partner. Path of Destruction is also much easier to dodge than Ignite. Ignite being a much more sustainable damage should therefore be leveled first. The one level in Path of Destruction will help you finish off runners, initiate a battle, or escape a deadly situation. This character is heavily dependent on farm and items. His abilities make farming quite easy though. He's able to single-handedly take out entire creep waves, farm the jungle, and get last hits on heroes. A good way to start your character is to pick up a shield, 2 Roots of Blight, and a health pot. All this regen will make dominating your early game lane that much easier. Missing your Path of Destruction won't be as big of a deal because you can just noms up a Root of Blight and continue the fight. Having the potion will make diving on characters much more viable early, having a way to regen back up to full if you have to make a quick getaway, or you get extremely low after a successful kill. In the lane, you're going to be focusing on getting last hits, saving your abilities to fight heroes, not the creeps, at least early on, unless you're making a big push. Sit in your lane and go for last hits. If you're forced to play extremely defensively, use your abilities to get some last hits, but try not to push the lanes into enemy towers even more before getting your ultimate, unless again the team asks you to do so or you have a clear path to the tower. Instead, you should be focusing on harassing enemy heroes with your abilities, getting last hits, and getting your early game items. If it's too dangerous to go in and get last hits, stay within XP range, because your abilities scale really well with levels, and even without some early farm, you should still be able to dish out a lot of damage around the 5th level in a group fight or if there's a gank attempt on you. I'll be showing Ra's early game laning stages as I talk about item builds. The first 3 major items that you should nearly always get are phase boots or steam boots. This is really a preference thing. You could argue that steam boots are more beneficial because of your abilities doing more damage if you have more health, but then you could argue that phase boots give you that extra speed boost to close in and use your ignite ability to engage. Remember that you have a phase-like ability already though, that also speeds up your character with Path of Destruction, which can be used much like phase boots. If you want even more mobility or you're already dominating your lane, you can pick up phase boots from the side shop or the courier and maintain control over your lane much easier. The next big item you should pick up is either Shaman's Headdress or Helm of the Black Legion. Eventually you'll want both of these, but depending on your lane, you'll have to choose which is more prevalent early in the game. If you're facing casters, go for Shamans. If you're facing more physical damage, go for Helm. These items will help cap out your regeneration, making it much easier to use your abilities without fear of losing too much health. After attaining Shamans and Helm, you'll most likely be working towards a Behemoth's Art. This will increase your regen to extremely high amounts, and on top of that give you a massive health boost, passively increasing your other abilities as well. It's universally the best item that you can choose for your character. If you find that your tanky abilities are not at all necessary in the current match though, then you can switch out Behemoth's Art for some Spell Shards first. Spell Shards would also be a decent pickup if there are characters with mana drain on the other team, because this will give you a much higher mana pool, almost guaranteeing that your ultimate will go off. If you took Spell Shards first, you should still go for Behemoth's Art after that. If you find that you are farming extremely well, you might be able to bypass one of either the Shamans or Helm and go straight for a Mock of Brilliance. Though this is a bit riskier, getting it will make farming and controlling lanes that much easier. Just be aware that because you spent so much money and time on getting a Mock, your tankiness will probably be quite lower. Going the Mock route means you will also have to spend time farming and getting tankier, which albeit is easier with a Mock, but will still take more time, and that's time you probably be spending by yourself and not with teammates. A lot of guides tell you how to play a character, but do they tell you how to beat that character? Not many do. In these guides that I'll be doing on my channel, I'll attempt to help people who are also having a bit of trouble defeating these characters on the battlefield. Ra's an extremely capable hero. He is very hard to take down, especially because of his ultimate, but there are some heroes and actions that you could take for preventive measures against Ra. But even with these picks, Ra is still probably one of the most powerful current heroes, and just because you pick a counter hero does not guarantee anything. It's all up to you. Firstly, there's actually a few good characters that can counter Ra quite easily. The most obvious one is Magebane. His mana draining abilities and his ability to blink makes it easy for him to drain all of Ra's mana, nullifying his ultimate, and finishing him off or running away before he gets into too much trouble. It's also fairly easy to dodge Ra's attacks because of blink. Do remember that because Magebane is quite weak early on, his ability to counter Ra comes out more towards the mid-game stages and not the early stages of the game. Blink, however, still remains useful against Ra all game. Swiftblade is also a pretty good character as well. If a Ra casts Path of Destruction and moves in with Ignite, simply start spinning to avoid all the damage, nullifying some of the return health granted to Ra, and now Ra is taking spin damage on top of that. Because he was so careless with his abilities, you can most likely countergate when Ra does this to a Swiftblade. Witchslayer and Vindicator are also good choices. Both of these characters have ways of nullifying Ra's ultimate. Witchslayer also has a stun and good burst, and Vindicator has a global silence that will make Ra's only 2 non-passive abilities unusable for a few seconds. Witchslayer also has the ability to save his ultimate for the resurrection of Ra. After he reses, simply shoot him with your ultimate and stun him, and he should be fairly close to death. The only downside to these characters is that they'll still have a hard time in the lane because of how squishy they are, so you must play carefully and know when to expect the toss of Path of Destruction. Characters that can hold and stun are very good against Ra, especially someone like Voodoo Jester who also has the magic curse. Simply put the curse on Ra, and if he uses any of his own abilities, he will take more damage from the curse. Polywog can also hold a character from far away, and any big lockdown moves like that work really good against Ra, though you'll have to have some backup to finish them off most of the time. I hope you enjoyed this quick look at Ra. If you want to play, be sure to use the referral link down below. Now get out there and something.